and go ahead and kick things off. Um, so this is our webinar today on the IP budget map that changes everything. Really excited to be here today talking about this. We have a fantastic set of guests who are joining us. We have Sam Garcia from Amplo Ventures. We have David Ashton from Patterson Sheridan, and myself, Alex Sorensen. I'm the founder and CEO of Tradespace. Very quickly, for those who don't know us, we are an IP platform for companies that are trying to develop and manage IP as effectively as possible. So we help our customers capture more inventions. We help them draft and file patents significantly faster at a significantly lower cost than law firms. And then we also help manage that IP and make better decisions on what to file, what to keep, how to actually leverage IP to support the business. But with that, I want to turn it over to our two guests to give a quick introduction from themselves. And so, David, I'd love to start with you.
Yep. As Alex said, I'm David Ash. I'm a partner at Patterson Sheridan. I help clients build and manage portfolios in a way that connects legal protection to business strategy. I work with a range of clients from Fortune companies to startups to universities. What really excites me about this conversation is the opportunity to better leverage IP strategy, moving beyond metrics of individual filings and focusing more on what to protect, how to protect it, and how to build stronger, more sustainable IP portfolios.
Perfect. And then that's exactly kind of the trade-offs that we want to talk about here is how does the practice of law change a little bit with different costs for prosecution. But with that, I want to turn it over to Sam. Sam, do you want to give a quick intro as well?
Yeah, so hey everybody. My name's Sam Garcia. I am a partner at Amplo, also now called Collective Global. That's a whole recent name change, but I'm currently talking to you from Philadelphia. I'm a lecturer at at Penn Law School where I teach over the summer and spring JDs and JD MBAs, a class on using legal knowledge in venture investing.
Perfect. And so I think what is unique about this group is, there's a lot of conversation, whether it's on LinkedIn or elsewhere in the market, about the future of legal tech. Will AI replace lawyers? Will it not? I think we want to have a little bit of a different conversation today. And I think Sam and David both bring really phenomenal perspective, both in terms of how technology has changed markets historically, as well as how the practice of law has evolved and how it could evolve in the future. And so again, we're really excited to have this conversation. I also want it to be a little bit more interactive. We're going to have a couple of questions we ask to the participants throughout, and then we'll circle back at the end to have a deeper kind of conversation and Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to post them as we go, but also we'll circle back at the end and we can kind of address a lot of those. So with that, if we want to go just the first question, just to set the stage, a lot of this conversation is going to be about how does the world of IP change if the cost of a patent changes significantly? And so I think it would be really interesting to start with how much you're paying today or how much you're charging today, if you're on the law firm side, for an average utility filing. Understanding that there's a lot of nuance here, right? You're going to have different levels of complexity, different technological fields. We're not trying to be super scientific here, just get a sense for what that typically costs. And I'm going to leave this open just for a couple more seconds. Feel free to jump in and make your choice. All right, fantastic. So not a big surprise here, right? We see a lot of kind of the costs of filing clustering around that kind of 7,500 up to 20K range. And I think that's typically where it's at. I think we see things tend to kind of align around 15K for a full utility filing. Um, so let's move on and kind of talk about what this means. So, like I said at the beginning, I think there's kind of this false dichotomy today in any debate about AI and legal tech, right? It's either AI is going to replace everything, you won't have any more lawyers drafting patents, or the other side of that argument, which is AI is never going to be good enough to draft file patents. I think talking to Sam and David prior to this, in reality, we're going to see something in the middle where there's going to be some collaboration between AI and really intelligent lawyers, and it's going to change the way they're able to deliver certain services, particularly certain types of patent filings. Um, and so you might have an opinion on that dichotomy, but we want to kind of put that aside today and say, okay, well, let's say it does change the way lawyers deliver, prosecution services. Well, let's say it enables um, IP owners to file for an order of magnitude less. Let's say you can get a utility patent for $5,000 or $1,000, um, almost as a thought exercise. I think we really kind of want to understand what are the implications here. And so I want to start with Sam, who, as an investor, has kind of seen other markets where technology has changed the cost of inputs pretty significantly, or even in the broader legal tech space. But Sam, I'd love to kind of get your
Yeah.
perspective. Like, what have you seen when the cost of a business input changes so dramatically?
Yeah, so not only the cost, but the timeline
Yeah.
changes dramatically. So what we've seen, I think there are analogs definitely in legal tech. So think about like Even Up or these other folks that have made drafting demand letters, that has made kind of pre-litigation services ubiquitous, and they've made them really fast. So Even Up has made drafting demand letters, filing lawsuits, doing all these things a lot cheaper and far faster than we've ever seen. I think what we're seeing is kind of a rush of these legal services, especially from these legal tech providers. So almost unsurprising that these things are really ramping up. But what does that mean on the other side? It's not like, one side's just getting inundated and not doing anything about it. I think we start to see everyone in this kind of AI arms race pick it up as flows go up. The other side also adopts AI, and we see them kind of go at it with AI to AI, which is a really interesting thing to watch.
It's fascinating, and I think you're right. David, you've been not only watching this, but actively participating, right? And there's been some changes already in the practice of law. There's been the emergence of alternative legal service providers. There's been kind of more of a move to fixed fee rates already in the IP space. But I'd love to just hear your general perspective on how you see kind of practices changing and evolving, and your relationships with customers potentially evolving in a world where the cost of a filing changed dramatically.
Yeah, we're undergoing a great opportunity for leverage, right? We're shifting from what can we afford to protect to what should we protect? How should we protect it, right? We have an opportunity for business aligned patenting, right? Our value as IP strategists, right? And your attorneys now, they are IP strategists. We are moving beyond taking a disclosure and just filing an application. That is not the business model. Our value is strategic proximity to the business, not simply generating applications. We help clients build assets that justify the businesses themselves. This means being at the whiteboard, understanding the roadmap, asking why something matters, and making sure that each filing protects revenue, R&D investment, your competitive position, and future opportunity. Right? We can use this budget to really build a sustainable IP portfolio that really protects your roadmap and your core business. The other opportunity that's there is we can go back and really review your current portfolio, right? You probably have filings in your system that you haven't quite justified, right? we can go in and look at that claim scope, see, map it to the product, map it to revenue, map it to the R&D investment, and really see, hey, if it doesn't fit into one of those buckets, are these some sellable assets? Are there ways that we can further leverage? The best IP counsel, they already think this way. The real opportunity now is to really partner with their clients and further treat IP as part of building the business and moving beyond the typical portfolio metrics.
That makes a lot of sense, David. And I'm also, you said something interesting when we were kind of getting ready for this conversation. We kind of talked about the stratification of IP services as well, right? In this world where you could potentially draft and file a patent for as low as $1,000. There could be IP that you'd want to spend, upwards of $50,000 on, depending on its strategic importance, the leverage you can get out of that, the dynamics in the market. I'd love to hear your perspective on kind
Yeah.
of the options that might emerge when you can have different cost profiles as well.
Yeah, 100%. We all know that there are auxiliary supporting assets that cover your design arounds, your implementation details, your secondary features, your variations. They're roadmap adjacent, but they're not the core IP assets, right? And historically, we really viewed, or some clients, right, they view all these filings as one of the same. Now we can really separate these and leverage these, right? You can use a tool like Tradespace and partner with us through Tradespace on those auxiliary supporting assets, right? That are not as core to your assets, and you can shift that budget. And maybe there are some filings that the historical 10 to 15K budget really doesn't work for those. You might need a 50K budget for that really core asset. And tools like Tradespace really allow you to shift your cost. And that's why I mentioned earlier the partnership. I really think this is an opportunity for strategic IP counsel to really embed themselves with their clients and really advise and help on the budgeting and really figure out, hey, is this an auxiliary supporting asset? Or is this a core asset that we should really further leverage and put our cost into? And so I really think we're in a paradigm shift of leverage. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity here.
Yeah, absolutely, David. And I don't want to speak for you, but I will say in my conversations with other law firms as well, and some of our customers, I think like we've seen that patent drafting space become almost commoditized to a point where it's not as fun or as productive for law firms to engage when they're just being asked to churn out filings at like a low cost and low margin. I think the value really is that strategic partnership, and so I'm excited for a world where again that law firm model is able to shift more towards strategic partnering, advising, helping companies make better decisions on kind of where to file, as opposed to just focusing on pushing out patents at whatever rate they can. But
We've never
yeah,
we've never been in the business of putting out wallpaper. And what I mean
yeah,
by wallpaper is patents just that patents. That's never been our business model for our clients, right? We always want to make sure that we have strong claim scope that provides strategic value to our clients. And this is just another tool in our toolbox to further ensure that we are putting in an IP portfolio for our clients that really provides some sustainable value.
yeah. I like that. Sam, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Since you're in the business of predicting the future and investing in it, what do you think kind of the practice of law, especially from the vendor and the service provider side, looks like in the long term in a world where, especially on the IP side, right? One of the things they charge for the most today goes down, is this, does this spawn a different type of law firm? Is it a different type of company? What are your thoughts on like different outcomes for like what that delivery mechanism looks like in the future?
I think that everyone's talking about, the death of this or that or whatever. But I think for a lot of the legal world, what we're seeing is the things that'll first be automated are going to be the things that lawyers necessarily didn't want to do all that much of anyway. And they build for it for sure. And so it'll involve a changing of the business model. But I think as things pick up, I think everyone's thinking like if things remained as is and we automated this part of the work, then we will need less lawyers, but things won't remain that way. We're seeing that with Even Up and all these other folks. Like, look, the volume of litigation goes up. So even though we're not doing a lot of, pre-discovery work or like, kind of like doc review or as much as doc review or billing for that as much as we normally would, we're doing like other litigation work. And I think it'll start to shift. And so for a lot of IP professionals, what that'll look like is they may spend a little bit less time drafting and more time on strategy and operations and maybe financial planning and whatever. And I think that that's honestly a very good shift. And there are some people who have rudimentary views of their company that think that IP folks are maybe a cost center. And they don't really see the returns on it because they're a little too abstract. That won't be the case anymore. I think it'll be a really valuable part of the company as they start to see like, okay, the drafting side, we're going to start taking less costs there, but we're going to be drafting more things. They're going to need to be strategic. We're going to need to make sure that we're like planning them right. And we're going to be rethinking our offensive and defensive patenting strategy, which I think is like great. I think almost every IP professional would welcome the like the introduction of more business focused work, which I think is what the future will look like as patents become easier, faster, and cheaper.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think that is like one of the typical failure modes that people have whenever they think about change, right? You assume, if you change the costs, people will do the same thing they've always been doing, but do more of it or less of it, right? Use more or less. And I think you're absolutely right. It actually drives behavioral change. Um, the nature of law firm work will change. The nature of in-house work will change. You'll do more of one thing, less of another, which is fascinating and kind of, I think, dovetails really nicely into the next discussion point here. And so I'd love to take a quick break for another short survey. Um, and so here the question is for the audience. And I know we have folks from law firms as well. And so you can maybe answer kind of what you would do in the shoes of an in-house team. But if the cost of a patent application dropped by 10x, what would you do today? Would you file 10x more patents? Would you file the same amount of patents and maybe spend the savings on a different type of IP work, whether that's strategy or something else? Would you file the same amount and just give the savings back to your CFO and kind of take that patent in the back? Or is there a world where you'd actually file fewer patents for some reason? Maybe you see the value of a patent going down. Would love to get everybody's feedback here. So I'll pause for a couple of seconds. All right. So this is really interesting. I'm looking at some of the responses here. The vast majority of folks have kind of echoed what Sam and David have said, which is they would probably file about the same amount as today, and try to look for other ways to put those savings into other IP work. Um, I think we had about 75% of people say that. There's a couple who would file more patents. Obviously, this is a little bit of an unsophisticated poll, right? Maybe you file not 10x more patents, maybe you file 3x more patents and put some more into other work. And then a couple folks that would just keep the savings. Nobody would file fewer patents. I think that's an interesting takeaway there as well. So when I read that, what I see is we feel like we're today, at least, we're not necessarily deciding not to file on things purely because of budget. We're filing what we need to file, but we're maybe spending more than we'd like, and we're choosing not to do other things because of cost constraints. So really interesting. And I think, again, that kind of dovetails nicely into the next part of our conversation, which is, what happens, if you're an in-house team, how should you think about this shift from what can we afford to what should we protect? So David, I think this was kind of your big point and where Patterson Sheridan, I think, has really made a lot of their investments is counseling people on this exact decision. And so if you're talking to an in-house team, whether it's at a high growth startup or even a more established business, that all of a sudden has seen a significant change in the cost of filing, what advice would you be giving them to as they make this shift?
Yeah. So this allows us to work upstream and downstream, right? Downstream, this is a great opportunity to use some of that excess budget, that leftover budget, for us to really go in and look at your past filings. Let us go in, really look at the claim scope. Let's see what we actually have protected. Let's map our IP portfolio to our products beyond just metrics of, just a presentation saying, oh, we've got this particular element and we've got 10 patents on that element, right? That's great, but what do those claims actually cover? How enforceable are they? How detectable are they? Let us go downstream and really look at your overall strength of your portfolio. And maybe from that analysis, there's things that we need to do upstream. Maybe there's gaps in the portfolio that we wouldn't have ordinarily known. And now we need to go back in and really make sure that we file on that and protect that, right? Moving upstream, right? Let's get at the whiteboard. Let's talk with the inventors. Let's talk with the product teams, the executives, the business leaders. Let's really discuss what really matters to the core business moving forward, right? I know we're talking about IP, but just across the board, right? We're undergoing this shift. We're in this fourth industrial revolution, and these next few years for your company are really really critical to really differentiate yourselves over your competitors. And so we really need to go in and identify that white space and be the first people there to protect that white space and really develop a strong portfolio with strong claim sets that really leverage the value of your company.
It makes complete sense. Sam, what do you think? So you obviously have a large number of portfolio companies. These are, companies spread across software, deep tech, other things that are growing quickly. How would you advise them to think of, these might be companies that haven't filed anything to date that have figured maybe the ROI is not there. Maybe we'll do it at the next round. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is like I think a lot of companies have this view. So for those who aren't familiar, I invest at pretty early stages like seed series A. A lot of companies think that like, hey, filing patents, doing all this stuff, that's like a series B, C deal. Like that's not something we can do right now. That's maybe out of reach, and for a number of reasons, not just for cost. So the cost is certainly something that they're thinking about, but it's also the complexity. So they're thinking like, okay, we'll have to handle this on our own. Maybe we have one professional that we have to bring on. And like, there's all these things. It seems like a big, complex process that they're just like not ready to take charge of yet. So they're like, now AI, I think, has brought that down to scale. And I think that it makes it a lot more approachable to know that they have these like great tools like Tradespace that can like guide them through the process and make it really approachable. So the cost, I think, is, something that they're thinking about. But again, it's not necessarily an inhibiting factor. It's more of the management, the tracking of these things, like all that, the discovery that they were worried that they didn't have the capacity to take on, that now they feel like they can. So I think what we're going to see is we're going to see a lot of seed Series A companies filing like IP, or like that's which is crazy because I feel like this is truly something that you see at the later stages. Sometimes you'll see it for hard tech focused companies at the seed series A because they need it. But I think a lot of companies now will start to say like, hey, this is actually not a huge barrier and we can get this thing done. And yeah, it costs, 10, $15,000, but it's approachable now. And we don't need to hire like two or three IP specialists to keep it going. Maybe you just need one and we can like start right now, which I think is a really big shift. So we'll start to see it from earlier companies, which I think again increases the playing field for IP folks. Because like now, I mean, I feel like a lot of IP folks now will have the opportunity to work at like really early stage companies as these things are just more approachable.
I think that makes total sense. It aligns with what we've been seeing. I've been fascinated by the number of early stage companies, again, earlier than I would have expected, that are coming to us where their first legal hire has an IP background. Their title might be, SVP of legal or general counsel, but they're actually coming from that IP background, and not just in hard tech industries. We're seeing it in software, seeing it in anything that's kind of touching tech. And I think one of the reasons is the competitive landscape is changing too. So it's not just what a company is thinking about doing, but it's the recognition that their competitors are going to be ramping up filing in this new world. And so one thing I'll maybe kind of follow on, Sam, is you talked about what you're seeing from the startup space. And again, I know you're investing on the earlier side, but whether it's earlier or even later, do you see the role of IP in kind of the investor due diligence process, and the ability of companies to like tell a story about their IP? Do you see that becoming more important?
Certainly. So, at the beginning stages, let's just like rewind the clock like 5 years ago. If I was investing in some sort of more deep tech focused company, I would expect that they have some IP even at the early stage. And I may ask if they have it. And that was my only real way to diligence them, was to see if they had it. If they had some sort of provisional, if they had something, something along those lines. Now, I could actually analyze what it is. And I'm not a nuclear physicist. I'm not a deep tech person myself. And so now having these tools like Tradespace actually gives me the ability to not only see what it is, but see like how it might be monetized, how it might be worth something. I think that gives me just a deeper lens into these things, because in the beginning, I really was just like looking to see if you had it, right? Which is a pretty big gating factor for those who are, legit companies and those who are not at that early stage. But now I can go a step further in this diligence process. So I think a lot of VCs will start adopting this stuff. So
Yeah.
again, a lot like the even up AI arms race, where it's like, yes, the startups will start to get it and it'll make IP easier for them to get. But now VCs will also have to get it, because they'll have all this IP to analyze and they don't know what they're looking at. So like they're going to have to start using AI as well to like make sense of this whole thing.
Yeah. Makes sense. So, David, we've talked a fair amount now about kind of the earlier stage, but obviously Patterson Sheridan works across every company type. You're working with some of the largest companies in the world, large IP owners. What is your perspective in general on what's going to happen in terms of the volume of filings? You've already said that your team is not just in the practice of putting up wallpaper and just putting out massive volumes of IP. It's more about strategy, picking the right battles. But I'm curious, writ large, do you think as IP becomes more accessible, the cost of filing goes down, you're going to see a general increase in filings? You think it'll maybe kind of stay the same, but they'll get better, they'll change? What is your perspective on the market, not just kind of what you'll advise your clients on?
Yeah. So some companies, right, they'll treat the lower filing costs as permission to file on everything. And that might look impressive for a while, right? You'll have more disclosures converted, more applications to file, right? More activity on your dashboard, and you'll say to your executives, "Oh, you've captured more innovation," right? But that could become a trap, right? You could have weak patents that don't map to the products, don't map to the revenue, your competitors, your roadmap. And those portfolios with those weak patents are going to be expensive to prosecute and very expensive to maintain. And that's going to be a large cost. It's going to be hard to explain to your business leadership, and it could also lead to a false sense of protection, right? So I also think that the companies that target their filings, that really find that white space, that really build strong core comprehensive filings, that really leverage their product differentiators, those are really going to be the companies that excel in this new transition.
Yeah, I agree. I'm curious if you're counseling a company that is in one of those markets where there is a competitor that is taking the strategy of kind of flooding the zone with IP, right? Just trying to totally cover all of the white space.
Right.
and to leverage kind of some sort of high volume filing mechanism to do that. What would your advice be for a company that might want to be more strategic, might not have the budget of a larger company that's trying to file, 1,000 patents, but
Right.
still needs to be able to carve out their freedom to operate?
Right. And I'm not saying not to increase your filings, right? I
Yeah,
think we talked about that earlier when we did the poll, right? We talked about like 10x, right? Maybe it's not 10x, maybe it's closer to like a three to maybe even a 5x in some scenarios, right? But at the same time, right, do some FTO analysis, do some risk assessments, really be proactive with your portfolio. And you're right, somebody's going to be out there filing, trying to protect a lot of white space, right? Beat them to the punch, right? Beat them to the punch with your earlier filings. And then also, right, I know we're talking about filing, right? But enforce some of your IP, right? If somebody's flooding the marketplace, right, and you have early strong filings, we talked about being upstream and downstream, right? Let's go do that downstream analysis and really leverage tools like Tradespace that are in our toolbox and really figure out, hey, what is our core IP that maybe these later companies who are after us, who are filing later than us, trying to capture this white space, what can we go enforce? Or where's our protection, right? They might be capturing some white space, but we have the original white space. We have those original core filings, and let's see how we can leverage those.
yeah, I think that makes complete sense, and it touches on one thing that I think Sam has said as well, which is like in this new world, this has always been kind of the dynamic of venture-backed companies, but speed becomes almost more of a differentiator than volume. I mean, is that something you've seen, Sam? Is like it'll really become about like who can file first and just be fastest at getting the right IP out there?
For sure. So the people that are filing first, and there's also this competitive thing, kind of going back to this even up example. Now that earlier companies are doing or are getting more comfortable with filing their IP, I think people are now maybe a little bit more paranoid that like, hey, if we don't do this now, somebody else might do it, and we can't rely on like there being no Series C companies in this space before we file, because even a seed stage company now could get their hands on Tradespace and file this thing like immediately. So I think a lot of these folks are thinking about that, right? Like they're like, we should get it too. And then we should also like, we should be defensive about how we do these things.
Makes sense. Well, this brings us to what is kind of my favorite part of the conversation. We've talked about, more of the tactical impacts here, but you know, anytime you have such a step change in any type of market, right? If the cost of something changed by 10x, it's going to have second order, third order effects, right? It's going to change other things that are maybe a little bit unexpected, maybe some of that are expected. So I want to just like put on our kind of brainstorming hats and think through like what else changes in this world. And I know when we were kind of talking earlier, one of the things that jumped out was the dynamics with the USPTO, right? So we already have a pretty significant backlog. If companies are able to file faster, to be more targeted in the art that they generate and to generate more volume, will that just increase the backlog? Will it maybe diminish the value of a filing because it's going to take so long to get it filed, or will the USPTO maybe change their behavior? How will those changes impact people? So I'd love to kind of open it up. Obviously, David, you interact with the USPTO quite frequently. What do you think, this means if we live in a world where volume goes up pretty significantly, speed goes up for the USPTO and their processes?
Judgment gets more and more important, right? You really need strong strategies. And you mentioned that scenario, right, where there's somebody, flooding the market, right? That create the IP system. That creates a lot of prior art, right? And their own prior art, right? They're going to face their own prior art, right? So that's where like FTO and landscape analysis and that's more integral than ever, really understanding right what the landscape is, right? And that flips to better strategies, right? You really need to the modern day attorney, right? We're no longer desk jockeys just under the prep and pros model, right? You really have to know the law, the business, and the technology, and you have to live it. And part of living it is really understanding the USPTO system. And that leads to examiner interviews, right? The USPTO is going to have their own AI implemented search tool. The examiners are going to leverage it, right? And it's going to deliver quicker office actions, right? That's where the interview comes in. That interview is a supplemental office action that you can really take advantage of, right? You can really explain that prior art to the examiner that may have not really dove in to every single aspect of that reference, but we're going to because we're the IP strategist. And so we're really going to dive into that reference and leverage the examiner interview to really go over the art that's cited, such that when we respond to that non-final office action, we have our ducks in a row and we're really aligned with the examiner, such that we get over that AI initial search phase from the patent office that might not yield prior art that's relevant, but just due to the results were cited by
Right.
the examiner. So you really need to know the system. One thing that I advise all young attorneys to do is the USPTO has a program called the STEP program, and it's for people who have just passed the patent bar. And they walk you through a day in the life of the examiner, how the examiner approaches an office action, how the examiner approaches art, how the examiners approach an examiner interview. And that's a great tool to really understand how the patent office works. And the modern day IP strategist is really going to need to know how to move a case through the USPTO system more than ever before.
Yeah, that makes sense. You've really touched on something that I think is critical with the inventor interview piece. I talk to a lot of people who I think feel very cynical about a world where you have computers, generating IP, you have computers evaluating the IP, right? It's almost like the human is pulled out of the process. But my take and my perspective is it doesn't remove the human. It actually makes the involvement of people more important in that practice, whether it's your attorney in terms of building the strategy pre-filing, whether it's preparing for that interview, whether it's the examiner, being better equipped to participate in that interview themselves, right? If there's less human involvement throughout the whole process, those points where you do have people involved get even more important. And so I think that will reward the practitioners who excel the most at those human moments. But Sam, what do you think? I'd love to get your perspective on the patent office.
Yeah, so I really think that as AI flood or not floods, but like makes patent applications a little easier and faster, and maybe there's an uptick at the USPTO, they will have to adopt their own form of AI. And once they do, I think that you'll start to see. I think there'll be a brief period. Some may remember this, like where you send in your resume and like the thing like automatically denies you or like the software automatically denies you because it's maybe like not programmed correctly or it's not taking in the right inputs. There might be a small period where that happens, but I think overall, I think they will be able to do like kind of the first pass work that AI needs to do on a lot of these things, which will mean that the quality of submissions needs to go up. And the quality of things that make it to people will need to go up as well. And I think the patent examiners, just like you were mentioning, I think will be a lot more well equipped to take a look at these things and really dive in and figure it out, which again, like you were mentioning, will make the human element of this way more important than was before, which I think is a great opportunity for IP professionals to get in there and to work on things that are less about like behind the keyboard and more about personal relationships and like how they present their ideas, which I think is a kind of a welcome shift. I feel like a lot of people would rather do things like that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it will never just be machines talking to machines. I think the role of people, again, gets even more important. Um, but moving on from the patent office, let's talk about some other second order effects, about what changes here. And again, I think, David, you mentioned something about freedom to operate, right? So this certainly could lead to a world where IP landscapes in general are just a lot more dense. People are filing earlier. Certain companies are filing more. Um, do you see like an increased importance in kind of understanding freedom to operate and kind of will there be services that attorneys provide today and maybe certain quality quantities that go up considerably?
Yeah, we're in a world of proactiveness, right? Companies and counsel need to be more proactive more now than ever, right? And we're moving right to a model where we need to really be integrated with our clients and really be there in the room, right? You can't do this job from your desk anymore. You have to be there. You have to be proactive. You have to be frequently conducting assessments, right? You should be always checking freedom to operate. You should always know your client's competitor landscape, and just being actively involved now means everything.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, Sam, what do you see in terms of like the changing service mix, or what how companies are going to have to behave differently with a lot more IP out there in general?
I think that there are a couple ways. I mean, a lot of it's to be determined, right? I think there are a couple trains of thought here. Like either people could make more airtight, broad claims, or they could make a lot more like kind of needling claims that kind of box people out. They might change their strategies accordingly. I think what they might do also is like they can do a lot more work on the front end to see what the business case is for a lot of these things. Whereas like, before it felt like shooting in the dark sometimes. Um, I think that's how these things will change. I think ultimately it'll be good. We'll start doing things that are almost always relevant for the company and the growth, and it'll be a lot more aligned with how the company projects their future. Again, kind of working backwards towards, I think that IP professionals of the future have roles that are more business focused than they were before. Where they're just straight up focused on IP. They're probably going to be focused a lot more on, financial planning, on how this integrates into the larger business strategy, and truly like the viability, long-term viability of the business. And this is something I mentioned before. There are companies out there who are cutting their IP departments and doing whatever. Those companies are kind of okay with remaining stagnant. And I think in this new AI world, they'll be swallowed up by those that are investing in their IP departments and allowing those folks to like get more involved in the business. And we see that already. In the sectors we would already think to see it, in biotech and wherever else, where IP professionals are helping drive where the business goes. It just so happens those businesses are wildly successful. And I think we'll start to see that more and more.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that proactivity is going to become super important. Um, so I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we have an opportunity to also field some questions from folks and then kind of maybe get to your final takeaways here. I see one really good question that I hear all the time. It's more of a concern than anything else. And David, I'll actually start by directing this one to you because I think you're really well positioned. So the question or the concern is, I work with two different law firms. I have deep, 20-year relationships with both of them. And I don't want to jeopardize that relationship. How do I balance, shifting some of my filing to a, lower cost model if that becomes available with preserving the relationships that already exist, right? I mean, you have these long-standing relationships with customers or clients. So you can kind of speak from the law firm perspective. Like if you're an in-house team, how do you go down this road without, totally ruining the relationship you have with your existing law firm?
Well, one, I don't think it's one or the other,
Yeah.
right? It's not a one or the other, right? And you're going to need those existing law firms more than ever, right? If they've been with you for 20 years, they truly understand your business, they understand your product, right? We just talked about all the need for FTO analysis, landscape analysis, right? Truly mapping your filings, right? Finding that white space, right? Those low cost entities that they can't do that, right? So you're going to need those core law firms more than ever, right? Now, those auxiliary filings that are, maybe like a cover sheet provisional that, we may or may not convert. I understand using one of those low entities, lower cost entities for that, right? But you're going to need your core law firm to find that white space, really work on those core IP assets, right? So maybe you save some money on your auxiliary filings, right? But now you can take that larger, maybe even a 20, 25K budget on that core case. It's going to be the foundation of your next business model. So I think it really works hand in hand, and we're really moving to a collaborative space.
It makes complete sense. I think it's very reasonable. So really what you're talking about is it's a reallocation of spend and resources in that relationship with your outside counsel. I mean, any advice for in-house firms that are trying to have that conversation with
Yeah,
outside counsel about trying to be more
yeah.
strategic?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think your budget with those particular outside counsel are going to decrease. It's just you need to really, with your right partner, right? They're going to come in and meet with you and be there. We talked about the whiteboard, meeting with executives, meeting with leadership, meeting with those core inventors, right? The best approach is to really sit down. And I mentioned the next 2 years, but it could be the next 5 years. Sam would be the guy to ask about that. But really, hey, let's sit down and let's project these next 5 years and really determine how you can help us. And we understand that we may move some filings around, but we're going to need you now more than ever to really work on those core filings, right? And so, hey, instead of doing these next 10 applications for us, hey, let's do these really 2 to 3 core cases at a higher budget. And in addition to that, go in there and really dive into that white space such that we can beat our competitors to the punch. And let's do that FTO analysis that we've been putting off. Let's do that landscape analysis that we've been putting off.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sam, I want to direct another question to you, and feel free to also weigh in on this one if you want. But I think this is right up your alley because it's talking about risk appetite. So the question is, yes, I'm always getting more pressure from management to do more with less. But as of today, there's kind of a recognition that, patents cost what they cost. And so I'm not necessarily getting yelled at by my CEO or my CFO to reduce the cost of a patent. And if I were to make that change, there'd be some risk, right? Trying a new model, trying a new provider. So as an in-house attorney, how do I balance the perceived risk of changing my model that's worked fine to date with like the cost savings that it could bring
Yeah,
or the
so
speed? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I think what folks might do is again, kind of like what David was mentioning, is like they go down the list of like, okay, here are the things I absolutely need to get filed with this budget, and here are some things that would be nice to haves, but due to cost, it's just like not really going to work. And know that like, okay, this is maybe like a little bucket to try from. Like, we'll try a couple from here in maybe my discretionary budget and see if they go well, and if they go really well we could, start adding from like the things that are a little bit more important to the business and slowly start working up to like where, you could be doing significant filing and significant patent work from these like kind of new providers. So I think that's the right way to do it is like I think a lot of people are rightfully so a little skeptical about going wholesale right away. And I get it because, you won't get fired for doing it the way that you've done it for the last 10 years. You might if things go wrong with a really important patent. But like, yeah, I think the right way to do it is just to test it out with some of these lower scale things. Know that you're going to get a great deal on them. If they go well, continue forward and keep going. That's what I would advise my companies to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Another question I think is really insightful. It's around invention disclosures. So if you think about that 20K patent filing, there's probably a fair amount of billable hours that go into developing the raw materials, right? It might be working with an inventor who submitted a one sentence invention idea to kind of build that out. And then so the question is, if we're moving to an area where there are these more efficient filings where the outside counsel is spending a little bit less time because they're partnering with an AI provider. Um, does that have an impact on the quality of invention disclosures? Do you need to train your inventors to be better at disclosure? Do you need to spend more time in-house on developing inventions? Um, so I'll open this up to both of you. I will, give just a very quick sales plug for Tradespace, or other AI tools, frankly, for that matter. I think what we're seeing is companies actually looking to solve that disclosure quality problem using technology and AI, whether it's plugging AI into the systems where their inventors work, like GitHub, like Notion, like Slack, to be able to capture more of those invention details and then leverage AI to kind of build them out a little bit more so that when a disclosure gets to the IP team, it is inherently better developed because you're not relying on the inventor to come to you and write a full description. But regardless of that, I mean, David, I'd love to get your perspective on, you know, in this new model, if you have, filings that are maybe lower cost, does that mean you need to have a much better invention disclosure? Does it mean you need to retrain your inventors?
Well, the right patent attorney, if the disclosure is short in breadth, right? They're leveraging, just like how we talked about examiner interviews, right? Inventor interviews are critical, right? We are always fostering and leveraging those inventor interviews, right? The right patent attorney is going to use that regardless. And we talked about, right, this balance between a company like Tradespace and a firm like Patterson and Sheridan, right? This is all about balance, right? It's about leveraging and utilizing those tools, right? So on the higher budget filings, yeah, we're going to go in there and we're going to dive in with the inventors and we're going to go through the weeds and we're really going to look at that. And at the same time, we might use the Tradespace tool ahead of that disclosure interview with the inventors. At the same time, through our partnership with Tradespace, if a case comes to us and the Tradespace analysis is already done, that's awesome. We're going to leverage it. And we're just not going to blanketly just trust the Tradespace analysis, right? We're still going to ask those questions. The more information that an IP strategist has, the better. And that's really what I'm getting at is we are now IP strategists, right? The hey, here's the disclosure form and draft the case. That model just is not sufficient anymore. You really have to leverage all material that you have, whether it's through Tradespace or through those higher budget filings, right? The right
Right.
IP attorney has pride in their work, and they're going to deliver a strong case.
Yeah. Perfect. I'm looking at time. We've got 5 minutes left. I'd love to maybe have each of you just share, what are your final takeaways in this, world where, you're able to file for 10x less. What is the one takeaway you'd have and maybe roll into that, your advice for somebody sitting in-house at a team, whether they're an IP attorney, a head of R&D, for how they navigate this new world? Sam, why don't you jump in?
Yeah. So I would say my number one thing is to embrace the cross functionality. I think you could get dragged into finance, you could get dragged into, just general business operations, and also a really natural place for IP folks to start, showing their value and to kind of expand what they do is in product. And I think a lot of product leads here, they'll start working for product teams. They'll start directing how products should be developed, and according to like IP things that might drive revenue and drive sustainability for the business. I think these things will become really, really core. I think the IP professionals, in a few years, will be some of the most important people at those businesses.
Perfect. David, what do you think?
I echo exactly what Sam said, right? The win here is stronger assets. The win are the assets. The new tools, they give us the flexibility, and that flexibility to move IP strategy closer to the business, closer to the inventors, the roadmap, the decisions that determine whether a patent portfolio actually creates value. And I just really see us to create even stronger assets down the road through the use of these tools.
Perfect. Well, thank you both so much. And for everybody who joined, thank you. We'll make a recording of this webinar available if you want to share this with any colleagues. And of course, for anybody out there who is looking at ways to kind of bend that cost curve to move faster, please reach out. We'd love to talk to you about it. Reach out to David at Patterson and Sheridan. There are law firms out there that are already looking for ways to change the economics for companies without changing quality, which is really exciting. And it's a super interesting new world. So again, thank you so much and look forward to talking to everybody soon.